worship. Like many words in our language, this word often gets used synonymously with other words, at least in the church community, that is. We say things like, the worship was good today, or the worship at that church is awesome. They really know how to worship. What are they talking about? They're talking about music. Most people equate worship with music, and in turn, many worship by feelings. If the feeling's right, if the moment's right, if the emotional reaction is right, if you feel it, you worship. God isn't looking for worship by feelings, and God doesn't use the words worship and music synonymously. He desires that you worship by something else entirely, which is much greater, much more demanding, and much more fair. If you worship by feelings, people who have less access to their emotions could conclude that they're less committed to the Lord and less committed to worship. They'd in turn say things like, that's not who I am, or I'm not wired that way, I'm just a quiet person. Worship is not about wiring, and it's not even about feelings. It's not even about you. It's not about what you feel like doing. Worship is about God and how God desires to be worshiped. If worship is music, some are better at it than others. And I'm thankful that worship isn't about music and it's not about singing. Why? Because if it is, there are so many people who could worship better than me. If it were by voice, it wouldn't be fair. Because God didn't give me as much voice as He gave others. I wouldn't be able to worship like someone else because they have better equipment than me. And if it were by talent, God wouldn't be just, because He would be asking me for something that He didn't give me. Paul says in the book of Romans chapter 12 that we are to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. He wasn't referring to just our physical bodies alone. What he was saying was that we were to offer ourselves, all that we are, not just our voices, but who we are, all that we are, as a living sacrifice, one that is holy and pleasing to God. And he goes on to say that this type of living a life that's a living sacrifice, one that's holy and pleasing, this type of living, not this type of singing, this type of living, this is your spiritual act of worship. If worship was music, if worship were singing, some would be good at it, some would be better at it than others. But music is simply an expression, which is why in the scriptures he calls us to make a joyful noise. But living out what we sing, living out our faith, this type of living is the worship that God requires, and it's the worship that He delights in. And so, dear brothers and sisters, as Paul said, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all that He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that God will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him.